Okay, so when we interviewed you before, we asked you a question kind of about your philosophy and how your philosophy affects your design process. And you talked about how collaboration and having like a diversity of perspectives is kind of part of your design process. So we
Yes.
wanted to kind of elaborate on that and basically do a blog that just has to do with how your Hudson Designs philosophy impacts their design process. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So we wanted to start by just talking about what your mission is and what your philosophy is, Hudson Design.
Our mission statement. I could recite you our mission statement, but it is even boiled down to two or three words. It's to solve problems architecturally, aesthetically, and architecturally. To problem solve. That's really what you hire an architect for, is to problem solve. And the training we go through to be able to solve these problems is in school. It's pretty limited to what they can show you about the real world. The best thing a good architectural school can do is teach you to have an input or a receiving perspective to where you can receive information that you can use to solve problems, and to instead of immediately coming to a conclusion or having preconceived notions. Our process is really about taking it.
Oh, we lost you.
Hello? James, are you still there?
Okay. So the process is at first it's very much a matter of absorbing information about a person's work process or their lifestyle or an organization's management needs, organizational needs, and at the same time we're also studying a site where this problem solving is to take place. It has climate, it has soil types, it has and all of those are a part of what inform us about the solution that the problem solving is to achieve. And once we understand the context, that's all that gathering of information about the context of the problem and the information about the client and their organization. Once we have that, we start a very creative episode where concepts are pretty free. We do go out to the site with our studio. On occasion, we'll take everybody and go out to a project site with a sketch pad in hand and copies of the program, and we'll have a very free discussion and sketch planning episode where all ideas are possible. It's a lot of brainstorming. People to go individually and walk through and come back with information, and then we sit down collectively in the conference room and we pin up what we came up with. So ideas that gathered force while we were in the field, and we put them up on the conference room when we have a what we call a crit, and it's in some ways it's very much like what most of us went through in school, but in this case it's more informed. Instead of the professor being the only one who's really been in the field, we have a group of individuals who have spent time together, but who have come from various backgrounds and have been working in, except for the interns, have been working in the field long enough to know what are practical solutions, what are appropriate ideas to bring to the fore. The interns come with a lot of freedom. Sometimes the ideas are not practical, but nevertheless they are worth considering just because they push the horizon. They cause some of the preconceived notions to move into more innovative ways. So we like to encourage the interns to speak up and not think that they have not earned the right to get involved.
Right. How do you think that impacts your overall company culture?
I think it makes it just more fun. I mean, it's a very creative line of work. This idea of architecture and interior design. You're taking the three-dimensional realm and you're changing it. You're creating spaces that will improve people's lives, which will, depending on the need, you're creating spaces that people will, over time, may have an emotional connection with.
Right.
People tend to, when you're designing homes in particular, I mean, there's a lot of intimacy in the way people use their dining rooms, use their living rooms. In the workspace, it's also an inspiring opportunity where you can give your workers or an organization's team a sense of their own identity through the architecture and the interior spaces they work in. I mean, if you look at all the work that a lot of the .com companies have put into making their offices fun, that's just a testament to how important architecture is in keeping employees happy, functioning, and creative.
Right. Okay, if we were to ask one of your employees about working there, what do you think they would say? Like, what do you think their favorite thing is?
They'd say, this would be a great place if that guy in the corner just never came in.
Oh.
No, I think people have fun here. We've started to do something new with our staff meetings. I no longer lead them. I at the suggestion of another at a business coach I have one year, I'm giving that role to other people. We're kind of rotating around the office. Different people run the staff meetings, and they're all trying to outdo one another with making it fun. So we had bingo at one staff meeting where if giving your report on your projects, you mention a key word, it filled in a little bingo card
That's cool.
somebody did Scrabble. I mean, it's been fun. We have a Secret Santa. And believe me, this is not not my doing. I can be somewhat of an introvert, so I'm glad that this is happening. I encourage it. I mean, it happens pretty naturally when you get creative people together. Stuff happens.
Right.
That's really neat.
How important do you think like facilitating that creativity and those like having those diverse perspectives influences your final design?
Oh, it's critical. The collaboration is key. Collaboration, and this goes beyond our office. We have consultants that come in, and we have tradespeople that we call upon, and we ask, to make sure that we're doing and simple question to an electrician is, is this really the right way to do this? Is there some better way, some more interesting way? And collaboration has led us to be very confident about opening up to others giving input. Long gone are the days when you had the master builder, where he simply knew everything. The building industry is just so complex. There's so much material, so much innovation going on in everything from mechanical systems to engineering to window construction. I mean, it is an opportunity for good ideas to reign supreme, and for collaboration to really bring out the best that there is out there.
Right.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
Did I answer your question?
It does.
Yes.
Yeah, no, that was great.
Yeah, no, that's great.
You talked before in the last interview, and you kind of touched on it now about less experienced designers. I think in the other one you said something along the lines of just because you have more experience doesn't mean that you know it all, and that less experienced designers bring something like uniquely to the table. Is there anything else you have to like add on that point?
Well, somebody asked me how do you get more experience? And the best way is really to get your ideas out there, participate. Some of the best interns we've had are those that, you ask them to design one thing and they come back to you with 3 possibilities or 4 possibilities. It's important that young interns understand that ideas are a gift. Ideas are free. They don't cost you anything. The more ideas that you have, the better chances are that one of them will be the ideal one. It's important that that people aren't afraid to give their ideas, and it's important that they not be covetous over those ideas. It's important that they not fall in love with those ideas. My mother was an author of children's books, and she used to say, that she used to caution me not to fall in love with, this is in writing, not to fall in love with your little darlings. And what she meant by little darlings is she would have certain phrases or certain ways of saying things, or she'll have written a great paragraph that was well constructed, had and full of meaning. Only the problem was it didn't fit the story. you have to sacrifice those little darlings for the greater good. And so ideas are very often you don't want to fall in love with an idea if it's not the right idea. I mean, you might think it's special and ideal, but it's just an idea, and it may not be appropriate. It may not be the right time or the right client. What you don't want to do is sell the right idea to the wrong client.
Right.
Right.
I had I have had the pleasure of working with a pretty broad range of clients in the political spectrum, and some ideas just while they could have been appropriate for one, they would have been have been ghastly to another. And if I'm doing my job as a problem solver, I don't fall in love with those darlings and try and pass them off on the wrong client. It's important that you understand that the strength of ideas has to do with both the needs of the client and the context of the site.
Right. All right, awesome. Do you have anything else to add on the whole topic of the Hudson Designs philosophy and company culture and process and all that?
Well, the culture has there's a lot there's a lot of respect that has to be maintained in a creative environment. You're putting yourself out there when you are being creative and generous with your ideas. So at the same time, I say you don't fall in love with it. You also have to be careful not to discredit too easily. Most people, when they get into a truly collaborative environment where nobody really has to take credit, nobody really feels, if they understand correctly the weight and the importance of ideas, it engenders respect for your coworkers. You're careful not to criticize or to come up with an objection to what they want to do without fully thinking it through, and without being able to compliment it on its merits. Even if it's not the right thing to do at the time, there's plenty to appreciate about the merits why someone might bring it up as an option. So it's a double-edged sword. You don't want to fall in love with your ideas, but you also need to have respect for other people's ideas so that you can take the criticism as well.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Yeah. So Jamie, this is Tad here. We're going to transition into the next topic, if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
All right. So, how does design impact the life of an architect? Or rather, how does the curiosity for design, how has it shaped your perspective on external things?
Excuse it. It makes your I have had the opportunity to travel to other countries and pretty extensively in the U.S. And you begin to notice the reasons why housing or buildings in different parts of the country are so different and varied. You can, as an architect, you want to understand not just what you like to look at, what's attractive, but also what the result, what were the influences that caused it to be the way it is. Yeah, when I grew up in North Carolina, we had a somewhat mild climate. You know, we didn't have much snow. We had a little bit of snow, and we didn't have really hot weather, but it got hot and it got humid. And so, the houses had porches and shade, and they responded to that kind of weather pretty naturally. And when I would travel to other parts of the country, up here where we live now, there's just not as much concern about shade. But let me back up. Let me think of another way to talk about this.
Okay.
When I was little, and when I was sort of in the formative years as a budding architect, I would gravitate towards building things. I mean, that just to be just was a natural inclination to go for a walk in the woods and end up building a fort. Who was that? Who was the disciple that went to? They were walking, and Jesus went up and was having a conversation with Moses and Isaiah, and when he came back, I think it was it Paul or Peter said, "Well, why don't I build us some booths, some shelters?" I don't know if you're familiar with that part in Scripture, but it was sort of a spontaneous. I'm
Right.
thinking Peter must have been a budding architect. He thought first thing after seeing Christ come back, all illuminated from talking with the prophets. His first instinct was to build something. Sort of I reading that verse of Scripture, I was thinking, wow, he must have been, must have been a budding architect. But because this is a common experience that I've come to appreciate about most of my colleagues. They tend to be doers, but not just for the sake of getting stuff done, but for the joy of doing it, and just for the thrill of doing it in a different way, in a new way, based more on the circumstance and the materials available and the need that has arisen for it. And so that, whether you got a pile of Legos or you're out in a pine forest with deadfall and pine needles to work with, it's that is part of what I think most architects enjoy as a child is the ability to build things. Frank Lloyd Wright's mother bought a particular type of block for him to play with. They were geometrically and proportionally engineered to help in the building process. And those blocks, you can still buy those blocks that Frank Lloyd Wright's mother bought him to play with. They're still in the market.
Oh, I didn't didn't know that. That's
Oh,
interesting.
fun fact.
Yeah.
So the other perspective about growing up as with this urge to build, it also it kind of informs your way of thinking about solutions. It's not just a matter of the sum of all the parts. You're also looking for ways to be creative.
Mm.
You don't want all the corners don't always have to come together. You want to have the opportunity for nature to express itself, and nature has this wonderful random order. If you look at the veins on a leaf, they don't line up. They seem to take off at various spots from the stem, just based on random order. But there is an order. There is a certain amount of partiality in a leaf where the veins are fairly balanced side to side. Now, it is a random order, but it is an order.
Right.
If you look at the way stones fall into place on the bottom of a river, it does look kind of random. But when you look closer, they follow a certain amount of physics. There's a certain beauty in the way they come together. So in architecture, if architecture were too predictable, it really would be boring. Architecture wants to be expressing nature in some of that random order. You want to create buildings and spaces that have an unpredictable nature to them that will inspire. And it's something that looks almost it's an artistic way of looking at the world, as many other artists would. Instead of just using the primary colors, you want to get off and produce a color that may defy a name.
Mm.
You want to give something to someone that is unusual, and it is part of not just unusual, but it is a little unpredictable and exciting.
Yeah. No, that's an interesting perspective. Yeah. Yeah. So could you describe I mean, you've kind of touched base on this a little bit, but could you describe a moment that stands out to you that really any other moment that really shaped your perspective of the external things and your curiosity for the design? Is there any other specific encounter, perhaps?
Okay, let me give me a minute. Let me.
Yeah, no worries.
school at the end of the year, but drawing and getting your ideas down on paper began to take on a more important role, and it's at that point that I realized, there's something to this. At first, I thought it was engineering, but engineering really isn't as creative, because engineering is bound by so many physical properties and mathematical solutions that it really can't deal with random order very well. So, I found that when I got into college, engineering was not very compelling. I began to feel very frustrated with the fact that it was mostly concerned with getting the right answer. And in architecture, there is no one answer. And my roommate, who was an upperclassman, he would come in at 2 a.m. and just collapse into bed. And I assumed that he was out drinking, that he was out partying. And I had not much respect for him. But I finally realized that he hadn't been drinking. He was just tired. And so finally I got up the nerve to him. I said, "Where do you go until 2 o'clock in the morning?" And he said, "Well, come look. I'm over here at the Harrelson building." And so I followed him over, and here was a building where the lights never went out. It was on the east end of NC State's campus, and I assumed that was where they generated steam for the entire campus, because the lights never went out, and I just had figured it was a big physical plant. So he opens the door, and there's it's full of design studios. And there's a group over here that's designing furniture and making furniture, and there's another here that's building a model of a multifamily structure, mega structure. There's another group over here, they're doing graphic arts. And thinking, man, this is where I want to be. And I understood why he was so compelled to be out. He was loving what he was doing, and he was working long hours just because he got carried away, and he would be in the studio working with all his other fellow classmates on design work. And that abandon, I will tell you, that dogs me today. I'll forget to eat lunch just because I'm on something that's compelling. My wife has been very patient with me in that regard, because when you're on a roll with something, it's hard to put the pencil down. It's hard to draw away from it, because your mind doesn't shut off. Your subconscious and your conscious are sometimes working on an idea, and it just compels you. You want to finish it. You want to get it out. You want to get it down on paper. So I would say that experience of leaving engineering and embracing architecture, it happened at a critical time, because while I appreciated engineering and maybe misconfused it and may have confused it for the creativity that I was looking for, it was an important foundation, because I look at engineers as my fellow collaborators. They are part of our design team. We have 2 structural engineers that we routinely are getting involved in our projects, so that we get off on the right step, so that we're not at the end and saying, all right, now let's call the engineer and figure out how to keep it from falling down. we want the structural engineer to be as innovative and interesting in a innovative solution as we are.
Right.
So we get them involved early.
Wow. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. That was really aspirational. So this is going to be the last question, Jamie. Do you have any advice for aspiring architects that are trying to cultivate this design eye?
Travel with a sketchbook. And don't worry that you can't draw.
Why is that?
Well, because it's the ideas. It's not your initial delineation skills. Those will grow. Those will improve over time. It's the ability to take the idea from the top of your head and get it out onto the tip of your pencil. Good ideas are nothing if you cannot communicate them to other people.
Right.
So it's important not only to feast your eyes by traveling, feast your eyes on interesting ideas, interesting solutions that others have come up with, but come up with your own and be willing to communicate. So a sketchbook and learning how you don't want to draw like somebody else. You want to draw how you think and how you see. So I heard this funny story about I.M. Pei. He was afraid to apply to Harvard and Yale because his delineation skills weren't very good. He was embarrassed. He couldn't draw. So he went to Princeton instead. And of course, the rest is history. You know, here he is, kind of the foremost architect of the modernism. Couldn't draw, but he didn't let it stop him. If you see some of his sketches, they are really interesting. They're not, but they're most informative to him. Others have to study them, but they are very informative to him and very useful for him to getting his ideas down on paper. Because once he gets them down on paper, then he can explain and get other people to collaborate with him. But he does not sketch very well. As a matter of fact, when he did the National Gallery in Washington, D.C., he was hired to design the National Gallery of Art. And he hired somebody to sketch. He hired a guy named Paul, I'm trying to think of the gentleman's name. But he hired Paul, put him on a per diem to sketch his ideas. He would come up with the idea, and then Paul would sketch them, and he would do these really good. Paul was very skillful at delineation, meaning using his drawing skills to represent ideas. So when he hooked up with Paul, when I.M. Pei worked with Paul could draw these entire interior spaces very quickly from I.M. Pei communicating with his crude sketches and talking with him about what this space should feel like. Paul would be able to do create the imagery behind the National Gallery, and there are a whole series of these sketches of the National Gallery in the concept form that were produced leading up to I.M. Pei getting the commission to design it. So this book of sketches, they aren't I.M. Pei's. I.M. Pei's sketches are much too crude. But that's an interesting lesson that I It's most important not for others, but when you're designing, it's most important that you develop a skill and a technique that allows you to get your ideas down and communicated with others. It's not as important that they be pretty. It's more important that they work for helping you process and display your thoughts.
Wow, good message. Good message. Well, Jamie, I think that's everything that we have today. Are there any other last minute thoughts or ideas or anything like that?
Oh, this was fun.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting.
I appreciate your probing in this way. That sometimes I wouldn't know what to ask me.
No, that's fair. Yeah, and I hope we're living up to the expectations and asking questions that will really induce a positive impact on your company as a whole, and yeah.
Great.
We
All right,
appreciate
thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate you taking the time to answer our tough questions.
Glad to. Thank you.
All right, well, Jamie, until next time.
Okay. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
You too. We'll
You
be
too.
in touch. Bye.
Good night.